Hey friends, today I've had a spark of inspiration around the idea or the awareness of our attention. In other words, what does it mean for us to pay attention? What is attention? And what are some of the ways that this gets understood, maybe falsely understood or misinterpreted, or what are some of the ways that we can become confused about the nature of our own attention? Because a lot of inner work, a lot of what I would call spiritual practice, is really taking full ownership of our attention, really putting us in the driver's seat of our lives, ultimately understanding that what we do with our attention is the same thing as to say, as to live a free life. Living a free life equals control over our own attention. And I will discuss and hopefully defend that statement today. It's just something that's been kicking around my mind. It's something I think about a lot. I talk about it a lot. But I think a couple of recent conversations and recent events have kind of brought me back into a focus on this topic, and I find it fascinating and I find it inspiring. But first, sometimes I love just taking a theme, taking a melody, something, I put my hand on the keyboard, the first thing I play, I just let that turn into something. I spoke to a group of students last week on Friday, and I had first of all, they were such a great group of students. This was at Seattle Central Community College in the mixed media program, which my brother runs. He's the director of the program. I had a really great time, and I had prepared a lecture where I talk a little bit about the creative process, and I talk about some of my own practices, some of the work I've done, my kind of experiences, but also some of what I do essentially privately to keep myself moving, keep myself growing. And I had prepared a lecture that with a kind of set of bullet points, but what I ended up talking about really went far deeper into some of my favorite topics, like attention. What does it mean to truly take command of our own attention? Went deeper into that topic than I was anticipating, and had some great questions come out of that. Some really cool conversation kind of grew out of that. But something that has showed up for me over and over and over and over again. I did a post a little while back called "Attention is the Addiction." If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. It's maybe 2 or 3 weeks old at this point. It's I talk about attention, the nature of human attention, as a kind of narrowing of our awareness onto objects of attention, whether that's a practice, a task, another person, food we're eating, thoughts we're having, right? We can direct the nature of human attention is kind of miraculous and almost ineffable, right? This is where in the spiritual traditions and some of the great mystical traditions, the notion of the doer behind the world, the witness of the world, the eyes through which we see the world, and not our literal eyeballs, but the perceptive capacity that's prior to anything in the world. What they're kind of hinting towards is some sort of consciousness that's behind every individual, certainly in the world, and potentially even manifesting through collectives in some ways. But the tool that we use, the only thing we really wield from the point of view of that pure consciousness, is our attention. We put our attention on something, and then things start to be done. Our body starts performing actions. Our mind starts performing actions, starts performing thought action. And before you know it, we're beginning to manipulate our environment. We're beginning to manipulate the world. We're having an effect on the world. We're making our mark. We're taking action in the world. And what always stuns me is how versatile human attention truly is. That the same attention that drives a car is the same attention that craves food, is the same attention that plays music, that hears music, that dances, that perceives the night sky. There's everything that we do, everything that it means, that we would, I think, maybe say it means to be a human, comes through the doorway of our attention. And so, and I also, there's something I spoke about in the lecture that I gave on Friday, is that we now, the notion of the attention economy is at this point well established, right? There's some of the biggest companies in the world, biggest, most powerful, most highly valued companies in the world, what they're essentially buying and selling is our attention. Because keeping our attention either on the app or on the portal, on the web portal, whatever it is how they estimate their value, and how, there's clearly a relationship between that and how much ad space they can sell. And that is their business model. So our attention is actually being bought and sold constantly. Our attention is the arguably the most valuable resource in the market today. Well, what does that imply with regard to our freedom of attention? How do we, in a context where so much of what we do with our attention is being influenced, if not outright manipulated, in service of a business model, what does that indicate about the importance of an awareness of how we're using our attention? And this is something that came up again in the lecture on Friday. I kind of did the spiel I was doing just now and talking about how, big, especially tech companies, are essentially capturing our attention and then marketing our own attention back to us. I mean, I know it's not quite literally like that, but that's sort of what's happening. Our willingness to use their product equals their value to their shareholders, and which equals the development and the further sort of evolution of the product, which captures more and more of our attention, ideally for them. And so then in the lecture on Friday, I was really kind of, getting a little soapboxy about how important it is to understand that that's what's happening, be conscious of the fact that that's what's happening, and not underestimate the value of our own resource, right? Our attention is our life. Our attention is our life. That is, at the end of our life, what we will remember about our life is what we paid attention to, what we spent our attention on while we were alive. So, what are we doing with that resource? How are we investing that resource? And in the context of many, many very, very highly sophisticated, very powerful, and very skilled, marketing and design wizards vying for our attention, what are some important steps we can take to reclaim our own ownership over the resource that ultimately, I would argue, kind of is our life? And when it comes right down to it, that's one of the reasons why I consider piano such an amazing mindfulness practice, such an amazing meditative practice. Doing something like practicing piano requires essentially all of our attention to do it at a very high level. You can play piano without really paying attention to what you're doing, but it's going to sound like that. You can meditate without really paying attention, but it's going to feel like that. You're going to kind of sit there and daydream instead of meditating, instead of letting the mind subside and putting our attention on the deepest source of consciousness, right? That's a skill set that takes some time to master, but it's also, again, I guess I would kind of argue one of the most valuable skills we could cultivate for ourselves. Because again, as a student asked on Friday, we want to make art that's relevant. This is a group of artists I was speaking to and talking about creative process and how artistic process, creative practice can be in a way a real reclaiming of our own command over our attention. And I somehow, in doing that, created the impression that I was saying we should all be off social media. We should, do social, like, forswear social media or whatever. And it was very understandable that was the impression I created. That's not at all what I am saying. I think I would simply argue, if we're working with something that's as addictive as social media, we've got to the bare minimum requirement we should make to ourselves, the requirement we should have of ourselves, is that we engage with it consciously. We choose. We ensure that to the extent that we possibly can, we're devoting our attention in such a way and in such a quantity that we can say, I chose to do this with my time. I chose to do this with my attention. Because then we're in the driver's seat. Then it's freely chosen, right? But anything that's addictive, which social media absolutely is, I mean, that's beyond dispute at this point, but I use the analogy of like salt, fat, and sugar, incredibly scarce resources in nature, in nature as it was hundreds or thousands of years ago. So our body evolved to crave those things. Now they're ubiquitous. Salt, fat, and sugar are everywhere, so we eat way too much of them, and we have a highly addicted relationship to them. Often, not everybody, but that's one of the big health issues kind of facing our society. Well, what's the answer? Get rid of all salt, fat, and sugar? Well, no. But can we have a conscious relationship to it? Can we choose how much? Can we dose how much we engage? Can we actually be stewards of our own consumption in a conscious way or not? Because if not, if the answer is no, well, maybe we want to look at that, not from out of any higher moral imperative that we do so, but simply out of a desire to be in control of our own lives. Well, that's that model, that sort of by necessity now conscious relationship to our attention has become kind of a increasingly significant imperative. We have to get conscious about what we pay attention to, or else our attention will simply be captured and by things that we won't be able to resist. We won't, and we'll end up feeling like we didn't have a choice. Well, how sad would it be to feel like I don't have a choice over what I'm doing with my life? That's a position we can find ourselves in, and we can even feel that in kind of short-term ways, like, oh, why did I spend my evening that way? Why did I spend my day that way? Right? We've maybe had those experiences, and so that's kind of and I think as I evolve my own thinking in this, what has become really apparent to me is, well, we need some practices. We need some concrete ways that we can take our attention and use it in our physical body. How does our physical body come online in our attention? Can I feel my body? Do I really know what's going on in here? Do I resist attention going into my physical body? Is there discomfort that I would rather not feel, so I project my attention outward? What do we do with our attention intellectually? What is my mind doing day in, day out? What is it focused on? If I have a practice like music or meditation, those are great gauges and great laboratories, practice laboratories, for discovering what some of our habits are and what our what some of the tools are that can actually give us a greater measure of control, of autonomy. Ultimately we're talking about spiritual autonomy. So there's a lot. This is a long post, and I'm going to follow up with this, but I can tell I'm inspired by it, and I can tell, I'm launching a group called Conscious Creatives, just for creative people who want to get together and both tap into some of the resources that I've tapped into. I'm going to share practices, and I'm going to share basically my strategies for staying in creative flow and for producing work and for producing growth, for creating growth in my own creative life, whether that's professional or not professional. It's kind of a combination of both. So I think that's why I'm getting so inspired about this issue of attention and how significant it is to everything. So thanks for sticking with me. If you're still watching, thank you so much. You are a loyal viewer. Much, much love. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. I will see you tomorrow.